Good afternoon. It's 4:03 p.m. and we are calling this Liberation and Freedom Committee meeting to order with a quorum of members in the chamber. And we'll start with any public comments for items on the agenda. So if there's someone in the chamber who would like to give comment, just raise your hand. And if there is not, which it appears there is not, we'll proceed to item number 3, approval of minutes from the October 20th, 2021 meeting. Are there any questions or comments on the minutes? I have a comment, and that is, I think it would be perhaps good if we hold these over until next meeting, just to put perhaps a little more detail into some of the items, just to clarify what occurred on some of them. That would be my input. Is there any other input from the committee? Oh, and Ms. Campbell, could you turn on your mic, please?
I agree.
Okay, so we will do that. Item number 4, educational presentation on identifying additional needs and barriers for refugees. And Nell Anderson is here to present today, and it's a real honor and pleasure to have her here. I think her biography is in the packet, and it speaks for itself, but I'd like to just go over a few points. And Ms. Anderson has served on committees and boards on the local, regional, state, and national levels in the area of English as a second language. She had been a volunteer literacy instructor for the Hmong community in Wausau beginning in 1976. She was director of ESL and education in Wausau from 1990 to 2014, and she has a variety of significant recognitions, including being a Fulbright scholar in 2005. So it's really great to have Ms. Anderson here today, and if you'd just like to come up to the podium, please, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. I'll bring my water. I plan to, can everybody hear me through my mask and everything? Okay, great. I plan to just give you a little bit of background on some of the things that happened when with the Hmong when they first started coming here, and then hopefully leave time for questions if you have, and kind of pick my brain on things. When I started doing some of this research, I realized it's 45 years since we've been here and the Hmong first started to come, and just kind of those experiences. We came, and my husband got a teaching job, and I started just volunteering with Lutheran Social Service. And then I also got a teaching job over at Wausau West. I was teaching high school English. And there was a new student who was Hmong, and the counselor called me down to the office, and she said, "We've got this Hmong boy from Laos," which she mispronounced totally, and said that he needs some English skills. So, you know, being the good English teacher that I was, I got out my English grammar book. I had him after school. We were drilling vocabulary, punctuation, parts of speech. I thought we were doing pretty well. But then the student confided in me, and he said, "Mrs. Anderson, you are a really nice lady, but I'm learning more English with my job sweeping the floors at Kmart at night than I am with you in this book that you're walking through." So again, he wanted a practical language that he could talk to people with, and talk to his co-workers with, and look for more jobs and things in the community, rather than this stringent grammar book thing that I was working through. But I've remained close to this Tao family and still keep in touch with them, and it's kind of fun to watch their kids grow up and be able to hire their son as one of our teachers in the school district. So it's just, again, it's been a wonderful blessing really for me to be involved in this. But the Hmong population grew slowly in the late 1970s and early 80s, and most of the students were supported by either a special ed teacher that would pull them out for a little bit. This is kind of all the language-based things, or a foreign language teacher. Even the degree of English as a second language, or instruction on how to teach English to non-English speakers, wasn't established until the mid-1970s, really. The Supreme Court case of Lau versus Nichols ruled, and that was in 1974, that it was not good enough just to give an English book, English math book, and an English science book to a student and say, there, you've got equal education. No. This Lau versus Nichols Supreme Court case said you have to provide instruction in their first language that will enhance or help them enhance their English language proficiency. So in 1980, our son was born, and my husband and I took some years off, and then we also adopted a daughter. And then we volunteered with the Lutheran Church, and I volunteered with Lutheran Social Service, and I did a lot of, working with some of these Hmong women that are at home. So I had my 2 little kids at home. We'd go over to their house, and we'd talk about things like the best laundry detergent, how to get the best deals at the grocery store. They thought they were buying lion at the grocery store. Well, it was really a pork loin, Loin, Lion, some of those sorts of things that are going on. But then I understood that the language acquisition from outside of the textbook was something that was really important to them and helped them move forward. In 1984, my husband and I took our 2 children, and we decided it was time for us to do something different. So we went overseas, and with the Lutheran Church, we taught in Papua New Guinea, at Abalab Teacher Training College. We trained Papua New Guineans to be elementary school teachers. And when we got over there, they said, you're in charge of our English as a second language program. And I said, well, I teach English. I don't know English as a second language. So then you kind of learn how to do things and maybe how not to do things. We came home, and to keep it short, we had another baby, and then I went back and got certification in how to instruct English as a second language, English to non-English speakers. Then when I was hired in 1988, I was hired into the school district. At that time, there were 500 ESL students in the school district, and there were 5 ESL teachers. So you can easily do the math. There was 1 teacher for every 100 kids. And what was happening was a revolving door. These kids would come in for 20 minutes. We'd talk, and work on things, and then send them back to the classroom. And for most of the part of the day, they would sit in the classroom. Well, again, the kids were sponges. They were soaking things up. They were learning as fast as they could. Their parents were tremendously supportive. They, were there with any time that we want them to be there. The thing, too, that we found out that we just had 1 bilingual aide, so 1 woman that we could speak to in English and she could speak in Hmong. And we found out that she was constantly fielding calls from the parents. And the calls were not so much, how's my kid doing in math, or those sorts of questions, but it was, my landlord calls, I'm supposed to be doing this. The utility company called, and they're going to turn off my water. What does that mean? I have to call the doctor, and I can't get through. Can you go to the doctor with me? My employer said that I need to do X, Y, and Z, and what's X, Y, and Z? And, and they haven't even done A, B, and C, those sorts of things. So, again, it was a challenge that we realized was we were doing, a lot of these, connecting with these people on a different level than just, teaching them their English and their math. I could go on and on for examples of kids trying to figure the language out. And I think one of my favorite ones was I was trying to teach under. We were doing different words, and I was underneath the table, and my 8 kids were sitting around it. And I all of a sudden peek up, and here's my principal with the superintendent looking there, and I'm trying to teach under. And you kind of go, okay, it's kind of a new teacher. This is kind of a scary thing. And I remember talking to a young girl, too, who said, Mrs. Anderson, I don't know this word like, because I read in a book that a girl likes a boy, and then I read in the book that the girl likes hot dogs. How can you feel the same about a hot dog and a boy? She thought this word like was something that she wasn't used to. Again, the population continued to grow during the early 90s. I moved on to the position of being director of the ESL program. I loved working with the kids, but I felt that there needed to be a higher impact at the district level to really work with some of these programs. we had to look at how we were delivering services. The instructional ownership of these students had to be more than just this handful of teachers that were pulling these kids down at the end of the hall. We had to find people that were going to be able to take ownership of these kids. We started writing grants, state and federal grants. One of our first grants was to assist our bilingual aides to get teacher certification. We had a lack of Hmong-speaking teachers. We worked with UW-Stevens Point and brought instruction to the campus here in Wausau, and began with 36 bilingual aides in a program to train to be teachers. So they'd never taken a college course before, but we had them on. And it wasn't really a fast track. It was, they were going to get a certified degree that they were doing this. Well, the college level courses in English were challenging for some of the bilingual aides. Some could only complete 1 or 2 courses. They felt like they were letting us down when they said, they just can't do it. I can take the 1 class, but that's it. But on the contrary, we were so pleased and reassured them that many English-speaking people don't even attempt to go to college. And look at where you've done. And you sat in that classroom and you know what it's like. Think of how you'll be able to relate to families, to your students, as you're working with them. 14 of those bilingual aides successfully got college degrees in teaching. And some stayed here in the area, and some took jobs other places, which was great too. But again, it was a phenomenal thing. We wrote grants for technology. We wrote grants for the arts. We wrote for Hmong Homeschool Liaison, and we hired Peter Yang, and he worked with the Hmong Mutual Association to help us, again, that communication from family to school to the community. The Hmong community was growing rapidly. The families were living in a few pockets in Wausau. They were living in neighborhoods right around here, over by Lincoln School, by Grant School, Hawthorne. And the schools in these areas were challenged with the needs of these students because, again, they grew fast and we had them in the classrooms, and the classes that sometimes were, the majority of them were Hmong. Well, we realized that in order to really impact language acquisition, you've got to, what's the good number? It's maybe 1/4 English language learners and 3/4 English first language students. Well, we developed a pilot plan to partner the schools. And this linked up 6 elementary schools. So Franklin linked up with Riverview, and Hawthorne Hills linked up with John Marshall, and Grant School linked up with Jefferson. So you know where these schools are. And then it was the fact that all the K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids in those 2 school districts were considered one neighborhood school, and the K1-2s would go to one building, and the 3-4-5s would go to the other. It was the same year that we were opening up the new middle school, Horace Mann. So it worked out well that, okay, this has changed for everybody. This should work out. Well, and we had strategic planning committees. And we said we need to do something. And the parents from Franklin, and the parents from Hawthorne, and the parents from Grant and from Lincoln came to these meetings and said, we've got to do something. We've got a lot of English language learners. We've got to do it better. So they were there. They were at the ground. They were working on things. They gave us ideas. We had a lot of strategic planning, brought it all together, processed their information, and we said, yeah, we think that this is a plan to do it, this partnering of the schools. And they agreed. This was great. So then it went back to the school board, and it was announced. And guess who wasn't at those meetings? When we asked, what do people up at Riverview needed? Well, the parents up there said, well, we could use more equipment on the playground. And up at Jefferson, what did they say? Well, we could use some more books in our library. They were not impacted with the population in the community. We didn't do a good enough job of saying, these are our concerns and what are we going to do with them? So when we did do this partnering of these schools and these neighborhood schools that now had changed, there were bumper stickers that said, don't bus our kids. There were bumper stickers that said, some things that you wouldn't ever want to put on your bumper. But the school board, members of the school board were recalled. The superintendent was bought out and left. We had the first meeting they had with these newly elected school board members. When I walked out of that meeting, because remember I was director of the English second language, the Office of Civil Rights was there, and the ACLU was there saying, you know what? Wausau has integrated their schools. Because the first thing the new school board said, we want to go back to the way it was. If you go back, that's segregation, and that's against the law. So then we really were challenged to try to figure out, okay, how's this all going to work? And so we had to redraw all the boundaries and try to move people around. Well, yeah, again, it drew national attention. I remember going down to my office at that time. Yeah, I went down to the main office over here at Longfellow, and the guy from Atlantic Monthly was there, wanted to interview me. Chicago Tribune was there, and they wanted to interview us and talk about it. Maury Schaefer came from 60 Minutes, I don't know, and did a segment on, what was happening in Wausau. And ironically, at that time, Wausau Insurance was sponsoring 60 Minutes, so they kind of said there really is a place called Wausau, and this is about. But the administration, and then we also, at that time, we brought a lot of parents in, as well as parents of the Hmong community, but also not just parents, but employers, people from the medical field, people from the technical and the extension, these sorts of people, landlords that had housing, because we said, we want to make sure this is going to work. So again, we had to try to get these people together, and we did everything to bribe to get them in there to try things, but again, we had some funding for some grant work, and we were able to then redraw the lines, but we also realized that we needed to have a committee that was going to work, kind of like your committee here now. And we wrote a grant. We funded a minority affairs director, and that was Thomas Lee. He was hired. And we organized a committee, and it was called Wausau 2000. So we're talking back, just looking 10 years into the future at that time in the early 90s, but 1990s. But again, to kind of, realize that we have to communicate. So we wrote grants for diversity training, and I think that was the thing that the employers and businesses and industry were interested in too. We did it where we trained the teachers, and it was a day-long in-service training. It was put out by the Anti-Defamation League, and it was called A World of Difference. And I'm sure there are these trainings, but somebody said, well, are there really diversity training programs? And remember, we're talking about 1995-ish. And I said, well, they've got sex education. They've got to have diversity training. So we looked into it. Got the funding for this, trained things. And the employers, as we were training the teachers, they wanted it too. Because I remember talking to a guy down at Greenheck, and he said, in a couple of years, the manager of this department is probably going to be Hmong. And these people that we're hiring in have to know how to work with a manager that has, that's different than he is. And we've got to be able to look at, and it's probably a female now, but again, we have to look at these different things. So we worked with that training, that diversity training. The YWCA picked up on that, and they got funding, so then they were able to continue on, and they continued to do that training throughout the community on just diversity awareness. And it wasn't just Hmong, it was total diversity in the community. Again, the Hmong parents were extremely supportive when we were working with this. We brought them in. We tried to help them realize their, ownership in this and how they can move forward. They trusted us, and we felt that we just couldn't let them down because they really had worked hard on this. Let's see, we continued other programs with grants, had the classroom teachers receive. A good one was that have classroom teachers actually receive English language instruction certification. So remember I said I went back and got a master's in the program. We wrote grants where we could get the teachers in the classroom could get a master's degree in English as a second language and education, and it would be paid for out of a grant. So what did that mean? Then the classroom teacher that sat in front of those 25 kids, that person would be qualified to be able to teach all those kids all day long. And then, as the classroom teachers were taking this ESL instruction, they said, this is just good instruction, but it breaks it down a little bit more in part. And you know what? I've got English-speaking kids that are working through this English language instruction information that I'm using and strategies and techniques that are really making an impact on the whole classroom. So what we basically eliminated was that pull-out sending that kid down the hall to his special teacher and, sending him back without any ownership. And it was like, it was working. There were still some kids. As we were getting new kids in, we had newcomer centers, and we were setting that up. There are kids that had some special challenges that we continued to work with. But we had a lot of those people that were certified right in the classroom. When we looked at the 4-year-old preschool program was threatening to be cut by the district, we said, well, let's do a charter school. And that was kind of a naughty word at the time, but we said, we've got to see what's going on with this. And it was just kind of coming around. But in the state of Wisconsin, charter schools are part of a school district, so they're not a separate entity of themselves. So we were able, again, to write grants. And we had charter school, but 4-year-old kindergarten wasn't universal at that time. So we had to develop criteria for kids to go to 4-year-old education. And we said, well, first of all, mother didn't graduate high school. Second, that they were a minority. Third, that they spoke English as a second language. And then we had a couple of others, but that way we were sure that we could get all of our new refugees in, those 4-year-olds into a program. And now that 4-year-old program became a model for the state, and they even took it. They went to Florida and Georgia to present the whole idea of 4K, and 4K is pretty universal now, almost nationwide. I was doing learning too. I learned some Hmong language enough to say, Kuhai Lumong Mimi, Najong, and those sorts of things. And it comes in handy now when I go to the farmer's market and shop, but that was about it. Kutsao, I like the hot spicy stuff. I want to share too that when Governor Walker was first elected, he was doing some drastic changes in education in Wisconsin. One of the things he wanted to do was set up a 4th grade reading test. And that would retain a child who did not pass that test in 4th grade, keep them there. And those of us that had worked in education, and I'd gone on and gotten another degree in leadership and stuff, and it was like, you know what, retention does not work. I mean, flunking the kid, keeping him back, having him sit through a whole other year of the same thing, it doesn't work. But, we were talking about how our 4K program, our kindergarten program would be that we'd have the English language learners for half a day, teach them that information in their first language, and then the other half a day they'd go back and get the same thing in English with all their English-speaking peers. And those kids were able to start 1st grade reading and writing with their English-speaking peers. Now, when Walker was, we called him to Wausau. He came to Wausau with his educational team, and he, listened to us, and we talked about retention and how that wasn't the right thing. And he said, but you know what, we're really interested in the fact that you've got this reading success, because we did have good scores and success in that. But he was also interested in how come you can graduate 98% of your English language learners from high school? English language learners in Milwaukee at the time were not even making 50% of them graduating. He said, how do you do that here? How do you make it work? And part of it, I said, well, it's this collective ownership. You've got these classroom teachers that it's not your kids that I'm teaching here. These are my kids, and I want to have success with them. So you have that 4K program. You've got the community that's supporting you. You've got, like I said, the business and industry and manufacturing, and the YWCA is helping us out with some of this diversity training. So it's a collaborative program that's going on here. And again, the kids were graduating high school and successful. And the other thing, too, is I find very rewarding to see, we still get the Daily Herald. We live over in Amory, Wisconsin. It's over on the western part of the state. We're retired out there. But I still get the paper, and it's so interesting to see a lot of the same names of the kids that I knew and their families growing up here and coming back to Wausau. I mean, there are very few. There's the Tom Killian that comes back every once in a while, and Katie Rosenberg, they'll come back too. But and we've got a daughter that's still here too, that's here. But a lot of kids leave and go other places. But a lot of the Hmong come back, and they are doing phenomenal things here and work here in the community. There are, I think, some challenges that we had right away when we first came. It's the male-female challenge, in their culture. a male was kind of in charge of things. And as we saw here, the females, like I said, I would go into the homes and work with the moms and the families and stuff. They seemed to adapt maybe a little bit faster than the men. The men would go to the jobs and things, but again, there was that challenge. There were some medical things that were going on with some of the men as they first started to come. The role in the culture as far as where they were importance. I remember a dad came in and told me, because his daughter was one of the people that was in that program where we were training our bilingual aides to be teachers. And he got very upset with me. He said, I don't want my daughter to be in this class. I want my son to be in this class. And I said, well, if he wants to work for us as a bilingual aide, he can do that. But I mean, I'm not going to just pay for somebody to go to college. I mean, we want that vested interest that they're working for us in the district. That was part of how we wrote the grant. And he still was very frustrated with me. Well, the woman did get her degree and has been teaching, and she still is teaching. She's over in Minneapolis now teaching, but still, I mean, she went on to get that. It was hard, too, and I think that's going to be one of your struggles, too, with the Afghanistans as they come, that religion is different for a community like Wausau. Particularly, I remember Wausau, now we're talking 45 years ago, it was very insular. When we wrote the grants, we got quite a bit of our funding because it was the fact that this congressional district was the whitest congressional district in the nation. So all of a sudden, you're getting all these Hmong people that are coming in. And at one point, we had like a third of our school population were Hmong. And just kind of how they kept coming in and working. And again, we worked with Lutheran Social Service and Catholic Charities with a lot of this. But the religion of many of the monks, some were Christian, but many of them were animists, so they had more, believed more in the spirit world. And shamans, and I was invited to, healing sessions with some of the shamans, and you realize that, you open up your door to and your minds to understand where people are coming from, and you realize, yeah, they want their family close. So you go to a funeral service here, you call upon your relatives, that, please carry them, into heaven, and that's kind of what was happening too at the shaman, at the religious ceremonies, the animist ceremonies of the Hmong when they had, funerals and things like that. So, I mean, those are going to be some of the challenges. But again, the more you can learn about it and the more you can share that, the more you can talk about it, I think, is a positive thing. I've talked a lot. Like I said, I got lots of stories. But please ask questions, or if you've got some concerns, and again, I've been out of it for a while. I've been retired for about 7 years now. But I'll share with Tom the name of some people that I know that write grants and, do look for funding. This one woman, Irina Bayer, it's her full-time job. And like I said, she also teaches how to write grants. She's got a class, I forget, it's a course that she teaches through a university on grant writing. So if people are going to be looking at that sort of thing. But anything else?
Thank you, and a
Sure.
wealth of history and insight there. Questions from the committee?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think the first place that we should start?
I think, when you've got housing, you've got people from the community that you're connected with already and that are here tonight, which is phenomenal. I think that's a very good place to start. You've got an organization, I'm not even sure, what's it called?
ECDC?
ECDC. You've got that connection there. So when they come in, and again, I think most of these people have had some experience with more, let's just say Western. Probably they had refrigerators, probably they had stoves, they had indoor plumbing, those sorts of things. Those were things that families didn't have. So you had to get these local volunteers that would be able to spend the time and the energy to get in there and help them with that. And, what does it mean to go to school and where are we going to school? And so you have people within the schools to work. Shannon Charbonneau is over at the school administrative offices, and she does the English as a second language program. So I've talked to her and said, you got to connect with this and make sure that we know that we're welcoming when they get into school. What does it mean to register in schools here? And that make sure that they are welcome. And again, I'll continue to put the bug in the ear over there at the administrative office. I don't know if anybody remembers me over there or not, but, but just some of those things that, that they really have to make that transition. Their dietary habits are probably going to be different too. And are you going to be able to find what they need and what they want, or where are you going to be able to find that? I live close to Minneapolis, and I know the Somalians there, they, to get some of the food that they need, they have their own markets and things like that. I've seen, now you have Hmong markets here, and you have Hispanic markets around too. So, I mean, those are the things that you're going to have to figure out what kind of food they're going to eat and need to exist. I'm sure, too, that there'll be things like clothing, medical care. I don't know what type of paperwork,
Right.
but the DC would probably follow up on all those sorts of things and have some pretty standardized information that you should be able to transition. But again, you've got a community here, too. And I think every community now, after the pandemic and everything else that's been going on, people are on edge. And they judge people by looks, and these people, the women particularly, are probably going to be wearing the burqas, and they're not going to be, looking like, Mrs. Jones from Marathon. So I think those are some of the things that you're going to have to. How do you educate? Is the newspaper going to help with you get information out? Like, who are our new neighbors? And, or maybe a column on a weekly basis talks about, hey, let's meet this family, and even, and something like that, just so, again, you can get information out to people.
How did you make the children feel welcome?
In their culture, too, I mean, the children are very important, but when it would come to a class, kindergarten teachers, what do? They hug all their kids and stuff like that. Well, that wasn't something that had been really a big part of their culture. So, sometimes we even had to tell parents, because the parents say, well, my kids like the teacher more than me, or they want to get a hug from the teacher. And we said, it's just that they're seeing, someone else that's showing them some attention and able to be there with them. But we had open houses, and several open houses, with parents coming, tried to provide food that was parent-friendly, and with the kids, and so that the Hmong could kind of get used to the school. I know that they do a lot more of that open house type of thing now before school starts, but this was something that was relatively new. And classroom, what expectations, but again, forgiveness has got to be part of something, because things are going to happen. A library book's going to go home, and it's going to get scribbled on by the 3-year-old or something, and, don't let that librarian go down there and demand the $15 for that book. I mean, those sorts of things. Again, we're, these are our new neighbors, and we've got to make sure that we are treating them with respect and dignity, and again, forgiveness goes a long way, too. I feel that the school districts will be pretty good with that. How are they going to be treated when they go into the stores? How are they going to, and when they are trying to purchase something and don't have the right words for it? Are they going to understand the difference between paying, $4 for a bag of chips at a Quick Trip as compared to paying $2 for a bag of chips at Aldi's? And how are they going to get there? Those sorts of things that are out there, that understanding. I would think that your health providers would be able to do a pretty good job, too, understanding this. But again, you've got a committee here, and again, keep your voice heard, and make sure that you have, the community volunteers that are out here, keeping their voice heard, and, sharing some of these stories that are out there.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Herr?
Mrs. Anderson, on behalf of the Hmong community, I do thank you for what you have done. If because of individuals like you, a lot of our Hmong community members have grown up and bettered their lives. Things that we have learned throughout our educational years have stuck with us because of teachers and individuals like you who has helped us and guided us and never gave up on us. On behalf of the Hmong community, I really do thank you for your value. Georgia, on behalf, on another note, I do agree as well. Mrs. Anderson does have good insight on the Hmong community. We as community, when we first moved here, migrated to the States, we didn't follow our foster families. We followed our families. If my uncles and them moved to Wausau, we moved to Wausau because that's where our general family, our clan, our system was. On the same note, is the Afghani refugees or our new neighbors are they gonna be seeking the same thing as well? Is splitting them up from their family members a wise decision? Those that are coming soon, are they coming because their families are coming here, their uncles, their cousins, or are they being split? We have to decide on that as well, of how we're gonna accept them into how many families, and if those families even have connections with each other. Because if they don't, they're not gonna even want to see each other, and they're the only ones they have so far for now.
Yeah, are they coming like from the same village or the same area in Afghanistan, and will they have known each other? Or the thing too is as you get the first group that are coming in, are their families going to come and want to join them? And I think that's a thing with housing, because sometimes you'd stop by and you'd realize, oh my goodness, there's 24 people living here now. Well, my cousins have come or they've, secondary migration came from California or from Georgia and came to be with relatives here. And they didn't quite have their own housing yet. And they didn't have that agency sponsorship. So at this time they were just traveling to get here. And so those are some of the things too, to try to find that housing and make sure that they were safe and secure and stuff, yeah. Yeah, well, that's going to be something to see how that's all going to work out. But again, open communications. Do you have Afghani speakers here in the community? Anybody that speaks Afghan? Great. I mean, that's something I think we should find out, or now your phones do a lot with translation, I think, so that's something, so.
I don't have the answer to the speaker, but the language barrier is something that we've talked about with ECDC and some other people. The primary language we're hearing is Dari and Pashto. And they actually have some pretty innovative ways that they're able to find native speakers to help translate. So I think that's something that the city in general would like to look into, and how we can participate in those kinds of programs.
There should be even phone calls that you can get on. I know that I tutor Spanish speakers over in Amory, and I had to take one to the doctor, and my Spanish wasn't that good. But I mean, so they just called somebody up on the phone, and so the doctor could talk to the person on the phone and got things taken care of. So I think that now, and phones have a lot of even apps that they work with where they can do the translation. But
it's a really important thing.
Yeah, and then if anything you can write in their language is extremely important. I think just for them to be able to see that familiar. And I would think if a lot of these people had been working with U.S. Offices or people there, or even military bases, they would have literacy skills to some extent. If they, I'm not sure how much, but so I don't know how literate they are in their first language. That was another thing, people were saying, well, we've got to have math books printed in Hmong. And we'd say, you know what? These Hmong kids, they hadn't gone to school. I mean, if they went to school, they were in Laos, and the language in their school books would have been Lao, not Hmong. There were not Hmong math books in northern Laos, in Thailand, refugee camps, and, so again, realizing where you are with some of those things, too, that piece of the written text, it's important for anybody. When we were over missionaries in Papua New Guinea, the first thing, they wanted to do was get that Bible, their faith, written in their language of those people. That was something that was important to them. But I mean, that idea of that written text, I think, is important. Even if it's on a sign, welcome to to Wausau, I think that's a positive thing. But if at schools too, they've got those boards outside, they can say Najong and, Ola and whatever it is in Pashni.
Thank you. And Mr. Hurd brought up last meeting when we were talking about some items, just the language as, I think, a key challenge and focus just with the committee, things we need to address. And I imagine that's only going to become dramatically more important now as time goes on in the near future. So.
And I think, too, I'm sure Wausau, like other communities, you're looking for employees. And I think that's one of the things when the new refugees come, they really do want to work. But there's got to be that guiding hand that's going to assist when to understand what the job is, how it's going to work out. Does this person need to have higher level English skills in order to do the job, or what are the requirements there? And again, you're going to have these community volunteers that are going to get in there and help them with that to try to figure that out. Because we had people that were working like at Colby and Colby. There wasn't, once they got understood what their job was to be there. I think it's just Colby now or whatever. But once they understood what their job was, they could do that, and they could do that 8 to 10 hours a day and make good money for their family. And they were very, that again gave them, the people that worked there, that sense of ownership and belonging and being able to move forward. But again, some of those things, it's baby steps, and employers too, I'm sure they want to get employees in there, but to understand, what's fair and what's reasonable and how to deal with things.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Mr.
Another question is, Ms. Anderson, in your thought, how can we as a committee or as a city reassure the Afghanis that this is a safe place?
I think that, that was a concern because, even when the Hmong first started to come, they didn't want let their kids out, or they took too much direction maybe from the kids themselves, because the kids tend to pick up on things and learn things faster than the parents do. So the kids say, oh, I've got this YMCA card, and that means I can go to the YMCA anytime I want to. So it's 8 o'clock at night now, and I want to go to the YMCA. Well, they were just going to go out and meet with their friends. The Hmong kids are smart, right? And, they were trying to figure these things out. So again, there's that communication that's there. But I think get those parents into meetings and get them to understand, have the police come, have the police force come, have them understand what our fire department is all about, what, emergency contacts, what is that all about, and have them be able to be part of that so they understand what's going on. They'll probably all be coming with phones and, ways to communicate and things, but again, helping them understand how that's all going to, how that translates into what, if I really need help, what do I have to do? And when is it safe to be outside? And, where we are here, it gets dark now fast in the wintertime. And, are they able to, what if they're at work or the kids are at school or at practice or something and getting home? Those sorts of things. Talking about routes for kids to either walk or if they're, and I don't know where they'll be with transportation, if they're able to, have driver's license and get cars right away. That's an expense that doesn't happen right away. Extended family sometimes helps with those sorts of things. But again, no, I can't. I won't let my kid be in an after-school activity because I don't have a car to go pick them up when it's dark like this at night, and I don't trust them walking, home or walking to the bus stop and coming home from the bus stops. Those sorts of things. I think that it's all those pieces that are going to be there that, as you look at, just think of all those little kids going off to school or, families, like they're preschoolers, and how am I going to take care of all of this and stuff, those are the things that you've got to run through in your mind, but it's got to be a total community thing. You got to be able to get all those people there.
Yeah.
Another question is, it's been a while since I've been out of school, but one of the things I do remember that really helped me out and my siblings out was the after-school tutoring. Is that a program that is still going on that have you noticed?
I don't know about it, but if it isn't, it should be. And again, funding for that should not be hard to get. I'm sure these refugees are coming in with funding attached. And, I'll give you the name of this woman. She'll be the one to be able to look on the federal listing of grants, available and stuff. She'll be able to find out where that funding is because, again, that was extremely helpful. That added things, that even just basic communication type of skills that were there and, some of those pieces that are there, that should be part of it. And I'll put that on my notes, too, to make sure that Shannon Charbon over there at the central office will make sure that stuff like that is going to happen. And, there are volunteers, too. You've got these families that are here, and you've got, retired people, that are around that are, doing things. I think there's the Literacy Council too. They might have people that are retired teachers that would want to come to the school and tutor and help out there, but that was something. And again, just to be able to have that assurance of, yeah, you're doing this right, or this is correct, those sorts of things. I think that's important.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much
Certainly.
for being here and sharing your insights and history with us, and we really appreciate it.
Tom's got my number, so if you have other questions and stuff, and like I said, I'll send you that all via text or email or something on these names of the people with the grant writing and stuff, and I'll make sure that I'll get him the names of the people to connect with over at the central office with education, because I think that's going to be important, one of the first steps. Okay, certainly.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 5, discussion and possible action on goals and objectives for the committee. 5, 6, and 7 were carryovers from last meeting. We had discussed those at some length. Not everyone was here at that meeting. Is there any further discussion on this particular item, so on goals and objectives?
Okay, so, anybody else? So, in connection to what, the presentation we just had, I mean, part of what I think we got to really do is recognize what our goals are and how we're going to execute them. Because, when you say liberation and freedom, but first of all, could you just read what 5, 6, and 7 was?
Yes, the agenda items from, yes. So I'll read it again. It was discussion and possible action on goals and objectives for the committee. And I do have some notes from each of the committee members' comments from last meeting, but that would be number 5.
Okay, so I kind of just want to stick with what we was trying to, bring out last time about having different representatives from community come in and have little bodies of community speak for themselves about what they want. And I think this would probably be also a good way to, like I said, reintroduce this body to the community. The community has more of a different dynamic than before, because back then it was predominantly white people and Hmong people, but that dynamic is not the same. So now we got levels of miscommunication and levels of community, because now you do have a somewhat growing African-American community. You do have a Latino community now, and you have a Hmong community, and now you also are talking about having a community of people from Afghanistan. So you don't have just that one narrow path of trying to create one level of communication. Now we need to fold into how do we participate, because we can't do everything everybody else is doing because that's what they're doing. Because then we're just repeating the same thing. And sometimes that becomes the problem. We become repetitive. So how do we create that communication? How are we going to create more of because I want to stick with the word liberation and freedom in what I'm trying to think of what's best for the community, And how do we bring about that fact that we do now have multifaceted communications. We've been in America all our lives, but it don't really mean that we communicate with the white American any better than a foreigner a lot of times. Our communication skills, even though we're from America, it doesn't mean that we're communicating. You will watch TV on a regular basis and see that the communication with blacks and whites are probably worse than foreigners, because we're not communicating in a lot of ways. And I think this habit can flow over into other communities' communication as well, right? So I think we don't want to neglect that we do have a communication problem. You know what I mean? We're talking about adults more than children right now. And how do we get adults to communicate on a level about each specific community's issues and value each community's issues equitably? Right? So that's why I think it's important to reintroduce this committee and also find bodies of ethnic people to represent themselves as a community. Ultimately, like I said, if we don't up the number of people in those seats, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing here, because at the end of the day, I want to see more ethnic people, Hmong, white, German, there's no white people, but more German people, more African people, more people from the community participating in this function. Me and you had the slight conversation about the fact that we can't just keep motivating people to show up when they're angry. We got to figure out how to get people to show up for events like this, because this was a positive event. Right? And so how do we get people to participate in the good things the community is trying to do, just like we can get them to get fired up to show up to stand against something, right? I think part of our goal is to get people to show up for the good things. Even if you do got to show up for that, we still need to be showing up for whatever positive things the city is trying to do or offer.
Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Mr. Herr?
I think one thing, like, from what my background and my history of knowing the Hmong community, a lot of our elders, they watch the news, and a lot of times, these things come on after we already had our meetings. They get put on the news. If we can inform them in any way to that, hey, we're having this meeting on this date ahead of time, I'm sure that they will accommodate their schedule to coming here and showing up and participating. Alongside that, I also serve on the Hmong Mutual Association board as well. And the hard part about us is that Hmong people, they work through the week and then they enjoy their weekends. They're more free on weekends. We are meeting on Wednesdays. They're not going to make the time to come here on a Wednesday. Sadly, truly, but it's still a way for us to accommodate that to where they're interested on, hey, we're free today, we're coming.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell?
I agree with Chris. I think before we can start setting objectives and goals and doing what we think the people want and they need, I think we should have some different voices coming in here, and not just BIPOC, but LGBTQ, elderly, differently, abled people, anybody who would identify, as a marginalized person. Let's have them come in and talk about what it is that they want and need, and then I think we revisit this conversation as to what our goals and objectives should be.
Thank you. Ms. Springer?
I agree with all of the comments from the rest of the committee members. I guess I'm just struggling with how do we get the people in the chairs? I'm really struggling with, what are the action items? What can this committee do to do the community outreach to get the people in the chairs?
You were going to go?
I have some ideas on that. So I feel like this, when there is, I know with the Hmong community, I work with Mao and other victims of violence that identify as Hmong, and when something goes on, everybody knows everything. And so I think that word of mouth is going to be huge if we're inviting them in to tell us what they need. We're not, trying to sell them anything. We're not trying to create problems or challenges, but we're asking them, genuinely, and we're being authentic. What do you need? And I think the same with the Black community, the Native community. When there was that incident at the Wausau school, Wausau West, there was a population of people because of word of mouth. Hey, come out, support, talk about what's going on. And I think if we use that, our connections, and have that personal invite, not an email, not necessarily something in the paper, but that personal invite of come and tell us what you need, I think they will come.
Thank you.
Well, and, the one thing I do believe we got to get away from is trying to believe we're going to guarantee that something's going to work. The whole idea is you try new things and you put your effort in it and you want it to work. You prepare for it not to work, but you plan for it to work. but we got to try different things. I do think that this would be a good time for us to think about what kind of events to hold. I think society is made up of a social construct and an economic construct. And I think we got to be able to offer communities both. We can't do it all for them, but we can make it possible for them to, let's say, the mayor got a strategic plan thing going right now, right? Now, how can we reach out to these specific communities to make them understand in a uplifting way? You know, she was talking about something happened at school. Almost everything that we feel progress from is from a negative reaction to something. I mean, part of what we're doing is trying to say, how can we be proactive? We're not going to wait around for somebody to say something bad in school. We're not going to wait around for somebody to be disrespected. How can we not just bring them something positive, but really meaningful? Because we can give them food, we can give them conversation, but connection is meaningful. And I believe if we can bring 10, 15 people from different backgrounds that never talked before together, we've achieved something at the end of the day. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I want to say this, and then I have to go. I was thinking what you also said, instead of having them necessarily come here in this forum, why don't we go where the people are at and have listening sessions? Going to the Hmong American Center or any place, we alternate the times, alternate the days, and go and have a listening session. Then we can also offer it, you know, partially on Zoom, in person, so like kind of mix it up a little bit and brainstorm those ideas.
Thank you. And would you have 60 seconds, Ms. Kim?
That's what you got.
Okay, thank you. Well, then I'd like to bump up to number 8 while we have a quorum and everyone here, and I'll make it very, very quick. So essentially, the idea, we talked about this before, was the committee report to the council, because it feels like unless we get these ideas in front of the council to know how we feel and what we want to do, that it's going to be gridlock, and we're not going to be able to make much progress there. So the idea was there's a council meeting, there are 2 coming up in the next few weeks. I think we'd want to do this as quickly as possible. Take the ideas that really all the members have conveyed in Ms. Ayuela last meeting and put them into that report. And, you know, communication, language, outreach events in both directions, so that we're having the event and then we're attending events where as a committee we can do that outreach, and then maybe some communication vehicles to get the word out about that. And maybe in the pandemic, some of that's video, you know, just so we can make that connection. But I just wanted to express that while you're here, because that may be the culmination of the input.
Are we obligated to give the city council a report from each meeting, or is this something we want to do so that we're on the same page?
Good question. We are not obligated to do that. And the thought process last meeting was, if we do that, we can at least indicate to the council kind of what our priorities are and what we want to do. If there's any, you could say, quote unquote, disagreement, we could address it in an early phase in the process rather than be derailed later on when we've already invested a lot of time.
So try to get some buy-in ahead of time?
That's a good way to put it, I think.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
So I agree.
Excellent, all right. One question for the city attorney. With 4 members now present, do we have a quorum, or would this be an appropriate time to close the meeting? Okay, so given that, may I get a motion to adjourn, please? Mr. Herr? A second? Ms. Spranger? So all in favor? Aye. Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.